Okay, everyone. Can we start the recording, please? Okay, great. Welcome. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Assembly Public Safety Committee. It is March 2nd at 11:10 a.m. And if you please call the roll.
Ms. Kennedy.
Ms. Kennedy is excused.
Mr. Perez-Verdier.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Solotel.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Allard.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Great. Welcome, everyone. We are got a full agenda, so we want to jump right in and get started. Just as a reminder, please, if you want to get into the queue, please put that in the chat, and I will try to keep my eye on that so that we can get people in. And we're going to get started with a regular update from the Anchorage Police Department. Chief Curl, you're on.
Morning, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, well, I have two things today. The first thing, update on the body-worn cameras. We had a meeting on Monday with Assembly members Rivera and Zalatel with the ACLU and the Alaska Black Caucus. We discussed a few things. There's some concern about my finalizing the policy in March. So we're going to get an update from legal on early next week. Once we get the update from legal, we're going to look and try to, we'll adjust the policy as necessary. What I want to do though is, I've heard the request from some people that they want more additional time to provide comments on the policy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give 2 weeks from today, so that would be till the 16th, for comments to be available. I mean, comments have been open for almost 6 months. I can tell you since the meeting we had on the 18th, I have received no comments whatsoever. So I keep hearing that people want to provide comments, and I'm not receiving comments. It was pointed out to me that people might be intimidated by the fact that we're wearing uniforms. So I'm going to open up. I'm going to give 2 websites, and I think these websites, they're a good platform for people to provide comments until the 16th. Those 2 websites are APD Chief at anchoragealaska.gov, or on our website, which is www.anchoragepolice.com. Once you go there, you'll go to the drop-down menu where it says, I want to. You'll click on the button, and then you'll see a section that says complaint, commendation, suggestion, and feedback, I believe is the 4th category. Just click on that, open up, and you can use that to provide comments for the body-worn camera policy. Once we get the additional comments, we'll review them. We're going to get a legal update. We will update the policy. Once the policy is what we deem is finalized, we'll release it to legal for one last review. Once they review it, we'll obviously give it to members of the assembly. We'll post it on our website. But at that point, we'll go to our union and we'll start the process to see if it is going to go, if they're going to take it, if they're going to accept it or not. Whether we're going to have to do some collective bargaining or not it's going to be determined. So that's what I predict, and hopefully that gives enough time for people to provide additional comment. And based on that, do I have any questions?
Thank you, Chief. And I'll also be helpful maybe if you could have someone from your staff put those 2 website addresses into the chat. That would be helpful, I think, for folks to have access to that. And I'm looking at the chat right now. I don't see any questions. I just I will just ask that, so when you say that there's additional comment, that you're saying that the original sort of link that was up, that where people went in and made a comment, that's going to be active again? Is that what you're saying?
We're not going to activate that one, but we're going to give these two websites where people can go in there, and these are both these websites are allowed to make any comments, suggestions, complaints, concerns. You can put them in there. So just in the title, just put body worn camera input, and it'll get to us, and we'll take that into consideration and run it by legal and see if there's anything we can do to adjust the policy to make it more, to make the concerns from the citizens heard.
Right. And just one second question for me. Once the policy has been finalized on your end, and once it goes to the union and goes through that process, just so we and the public are aware of it, there will be opportunities down the road in coming years, months, whatever, to adjust that. There, based on what I have heard from you in the past, policies change all the time, and if the new information comes to light or changes need to be made, those are things that you are open to doing and would be willing to do. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, case law could change. There's a number of factors that could influence us, and so we update policies daily. I mean, we're all constantly updating our policies to bring them in line with our operational procedures and case law.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. I don't see any other questions on that topic, so you can go on to the second, please.
Mr.
Chair.
Sure. Yeah, I don't see anybody in the queue, but yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Ms. Salatel. So yeah, I just wanted to provide the feedback that I think the frustration seems to stem from, when are we getting to the point where we're saying that the policy is finalized so that folks know that this is it, and then can plan accordingly. So I just wanted to provide that feedback. That seems to be a piece to it, and I appreciate that APD is remaining fluid and responsive. But I think that every time we're asking or that it's being opened back up for further discussion, the question is, when do we get to a final point? And so I appreciate the additional information. And it says I have bad network quality, so I think it's going to drop me. Thanks.
Chief, do you want to respond to that?
So, like I said, I'll keep it open until the 16th. We'll finish it. We'll finish the final policy. We'll provide it to city legal. And I would say, I'm going to turn around and look at my calendar. I am going to say by the 21st, as long as I have a legal review of our whatever updates we make to the policy will be finalized for this version for us to negotiate with the union to implement the body cameras on the street.
Thank you. And did I hear someone else trying to get in? Was that you, Mr. Rivera?
That was, I don't necessarily have a comment, but I think you might be having a technical issue, because there are several folks that are in the queue, and you might not be, and there are several comments in the queue as well that should be read in the record.
Okay, yeah, for some reason I am not seeing that, so I would appreciate some assistance there.
Cameron, this is Jamie. I just wanted to make sure you knew I was present, because I think there is some technical difficulties.
Thank you. Yeah, for the record, yeah, for some reason I don't see anything in the chat, so I'm not sure why. Well, let me just say, is there anyone else in the queue from the assembly? Any other assembly members in the queue?
Mr. Chair, this is Austin. I'm not in the queue, but I just wanted to let you know I'm here as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Ms. Salato. Because there's some information in the chat about how to submit comments, could someone from APD who posted it go ahead and read it out so it's available for those on the phone? Thank you. That would be great.
Yep, I'll go ahead and read that. It's been posted in the chat. So the two websites are APD Chief at AnchorageAK.com And at that website, you just submit a comment to me. And the other website is our website, the Anchorage Police Department. It's www.anchoragepolice.com. You select the drop-down menu, I want to, and from there you select the complaint accommodation suggestion. And once you open that up, you're free to leave a complaint, accommodation, a suggestion, and there's the fourth one there, feedback, I believe is the fourth thing. And just put that in there, just put the subject body worn camera, and we'll get on it.
Let's unmute, save. Great. Okay, I did just look at a setting that said the meeting chat is muted, so I unmuted it. I'm not sure if that did anything. So, okay. All right, Chief, thanks for doing that, and I appreciate the assistance from my colleagues. I still don't know if I can see anything, so if something pops up, please feel free to jump in and assist. Chief, would you like to move on to item 3B?
Okay, so next I want to introduce one of my sections here. Detective Torres is going to be talking about the human trafficking overview. Sergeant Witt is also in the room with him. Lieutenant Rovat and Detective Cameron is in there as well. So Kiana, if you could share the presentation for the human trafficking, and then there they are. Lenny, if you want to take it away.
Good morning, I'm Detective Torres. I am obviously a detective with the Anchorage Police Department, and I am the Federal Task Force officer working with the FBI pertaining to human trafficking investigations and child exploitation. So if we can go to the next screen, our agenda. So we'll be talking about the history that APD has as concerning human trafficking investigations, our current task force unit, what trafficking is, the crimes that are associated with trafficking investigations, the complexities associated with trafficking investigations, current trends here in Alaska, which differentiate from the rest of the lower 48, some recent investigation examples that we have worked, and some of the unaddressed issues and investigations that need to be addressed as of yet. Feel free at any time to just jump in and ask any questions if there's any concerns that arise throughout the PowerPoint. And I'm not able to see any comments here, so if there are comments that pop up, somebody will need to read it for us because I'm not seeing it. So as far as human trafficking goes, there are two components to human trafficking. One is forced labor, and the other being sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation of children. Right now, we are only focusing on the sex trafficking and the commercial exploitation of children. It's such a heavy caseload that unfortunately we do not have the ability to conduct the forced labor investigations. We do leave that to other federal and state agencies to assist us in that. And if it reaches a level where it really is that drastic that we need to step in, then of course we would do everything that we could to address that. But right now we are sticking to just the sex trafficking and the exploitation of children. Next screen, please. So what is sex trafficking? It's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act that's induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or under the age of 18 on the federal side, and on the state side, 19 and under would be considered a minor, and we can investigate those as well. The difference there being, if they are minors, we do not need the induced force, fraud, or coercion, as long as the trafficker is aware of the minor's age or that they are a minor, then we're able to conduct that investigation and get pretty good results out of it. Next screen, please. So this is what trafficking is not. The consensual sex for drugs or alcohol where the receiver keeps the drugs. Consensual sex for money where the receiver of the money keeps that money, or it doesn't have to be money, it could be anything of value. And then sharing proceeds with a partner where there's no force, fraud, or coercion. In that example, it would be, let's say, a couple where they are addicted to some substance, and it's usually the female who would be, let's say, prostituting herself and then sharing the proceeds with her and her partner. That would not be considered trafficking. Prostitution is not trafficking, and we do not usually do prostitution investigations unless it pertains to a minor. And even then, we are not going to investigate the minor as far as looking to place charges on this minor. We would investigate the minor only to get her out of that lifestyle and get her the help that she needs, not for criminal purposes. And I did want to make sure that we understand that even though I say that it's money, trafficking, anything in exchange, anything of value in exchange for a sex act is what we would be looking for as far as trafficking. It does not have to be money. So as far as our history, initially I was hired on in 2000. Initially, like many other police departments across the nation, we were focusing, when we did investigation into prostitution, we were focusing more on the prostitute side than on the trafficking side. It wasn't as well known, the trafficking aspect, and our laws really were not that definitive as far as traffickers. So like many other departments, we had a vice unit, and we were focusing on how to deal with the prostitution problem. And unfortunately, we were looking at the prostitutes as a criminal element and that as victims, which a lot of them were. So in 2004, then it was the precursor of the vice unit. It was called Special Assignment Unit. We attended, I was part of that unit at the time, we attended a training at the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children that pertains specifically towards prostitution and human trafficking. And that's where we learned so much about what we were doing was almost re-victimizing so many victims, because it didn't give these trafficking victims an out to approach the police as victims, because we were more focused on the fact that they were criminals first. This was our first introduction to the trafficking aspect of prostitution and not just prostitution. After 2004, 2005, the department created the vice unit that was pretty much exclusive towards trafficking. We did other undercover work, but the majority of our investigations really did pertain to the trafficking aspect. The FBI at that time also joined in with us. They weren't part of the vice unit, but we were working hand in hand with the FBI, and we're learning a lot of different aspects that were being investigated nationwide and not just exclusive to Alaska. So they brought a lot of enlightenment and a lot of help to our endeavor to address the trafficking issue that we had here in the state. And that partnership obviously continues throughout till present. In 2009, we actually started this investigation. I want to say close to 2005, but the culmination was in 2009. This was the first federal prosecution of a trafficking suspect in the state of Alaska. The individual's name was Don Webster. He went by the street name or moniker of Jerry Starr. We identified well over 20 victims in this investigation. And at the end of the investigation, he was sentenced to 35 years with a $3.6 million restitution order. This was the first real trafficking investigation that was brought before the state for prosecution, and everybody was learning the hard way what trafficking investigations entailed, including prosecution, law enforcement, and even on the judicial side, the judges themselves. So it was an eye-opener to the state as to how bad trafficking really is, and the consequences, long-term consequences of trafficking. In 2012, the FBI became the lead full-time investigative agency for human trafficking across the state, not just in Anchorage. And APD assigned one full-time TFO to be a task force officer working with the FBI, and that has continued to date as well. In addition to our investigations, APD and the FBI, we do presentations and training across the state to the community and other law enforcement agencies. Pretty much anybody that's asking to be educated as far as what trafficking is and what can be done to combat trafficking. And then the legislation changes. The legislation changed pretty much around that time when trafficking became a national problem that was now recognized as a national problem, and APD and the FBI addressed how the current legislation back then really was ineffective in addressing how serious the problem was, and there was a lot of changes that were made, a lot of positive changes made in the legislation in the state of Alaska. Next slide, please. So, the current trafficking task force officer, we have one full-time FBI agent that's assigned to human trafficking investigations. We have myself, who's a full-time APD task force officer, and Detective Cameron is now the part-time trafficking investigator with APD, and we have an FBI analyst. We recently, there was a change within APD where the task force officers specific to human trafficking are now going to be assigned working out of the cyber crimes unit because of the ICAT component. We work such similar child exploitation investigations that it was a real positive change to add us into the cyber crimes unit, because now what it's done is it's allowing the detectives assigned to the cyber crimes unit to now also become part-time task force officers for human trafficking investigation, besides the child exploitation cyber crimes investigations that they do. So that's given us a few more bodies which were desperately needed for these investigations. We are also partnered with AST, the state troopers, when it comes to out of Anchorage type investigations. I know that they have a unit in the troopers based out of Wasilla, Palmer, that do work human trafficking investigations and are trained to work human trafficking investigations, but it's not a full-time unit, and they're only able to address it depending on the priority of the investigations that they have to work. And okay, so these are some of the typical characteristics and vulnerabilities of the victims of human trafficking. When I became the task force officer back in 2018, these issues have been around for as long as I've been doing investigations for human trafficking. But what struck me as different was how currently we are being overwhelmed by underage victims of trafficking, to the point where unless it's an extremely violent case with an adult, we're not able to address trafficking with adults. That's how many minors we have that we're investigating. Obviously, being at that vulnerable age puts them at a higher priority of where we're going to be investigating. But These vulnerabilities, these characteristics are common throughout, whether they're adult or whether they're minors. Obviously, the drug and the alcohol use and addiction, that's always been part of one of the issues pertaining to our victims. We are seeing a lot of victims with mental health issues that make them extremely vulnerable to being trafficked. And the prior victimization as a child, it goes hand in hand with the high, unfortunate, with a high volume of investigations that we have for sexual abuse of minors. Next slide. So when we do human trafficking investigations, it's not just human trafficking investigations, but this is all of the crimes that are typically associated with these investigations that we're working. I mean, the list is right there, and it's just part of what human trafficking is. These are the crimes that are associated with them. Next slide. So the complexities that we have with the human trafficking investigations, our victims are not compliant, whether it's due to the addictions, their mental health issues, their traumas, whatever it is. Our victims typically do not seek our help. We have to find them. They don't always give us disclosures at the beginning of our contact with them, making us have to make contact with them on different occasions. It's a very time-consuming and time-sensitive investigation. They're not going to be resolved in a short amount of time. It usually can take up to a couple of years before it's completely resolved. And then specialized training and experience that's needed. We need investigators that are adept at interviewing victim-centered interviewing and investigations of children and adults. They also have to be drug experts. We have to monitor. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes real quick. Maintain our expertise on the evolving trends that are going on in the human trafficking realm, and the fact that human trafficking in Alaska differs from human trafficking in the rest of the 48, and that's due to our culture, the distance, and the environments. Okay, next slide. Okay. We have been seeing an uprise in gang-related trafficking. One of the cases that we'll discuss was gang-related. We are seeing a lot of our trafficking victims, not just sex trafficking, but also being used to bring drugs up to the state of Alaska and/or commit other crimes. And there is a large group of traffickers that like to deal exclusively with Alaska Native women, as they believe that, unfortunately, that they believe that it's easier to break them into this lifestyle because of past abuse that they've endured. And then we also have this issue with our victims being forced to commit crimes in this lifestyle and their fear of being investigated by law enforcement as well for these crimes. Next slide. This is the case that I was referring to. This gang was known as the Slide Gang. It became an issue with not just APD, but they were an issue with almost every law enforcement agency in the state, federal and state. We were able to identify one victim initially that pretty much opened up the door to what was going on with this particular gang. And through her, we were able to identify 9 individuals in this gang that were involved in trafficking, the drug trade, and every other crime that you can think of. We identified 8 minor victims that we were able to recover, And at the time that I did this PowerPoint, we had already gone to trial with, I think, 2 or 3 of them. And just recently, 2 of them were sentenced. One was sentenced to 25 years federally. The other was sentenced to 38 years federally. Go on to the next slide. Okay, because we do investigations across the state, this was a case where our minor victim was from Kotzebue. This individual he was a family friend and was sexually abusing her by the age of 10 and would give her money, drugs, and alcohol in exchange for the sex. We were able to actually step in on a federal level on this aspect of the investigation. We charged him federally with sex trafficking of a minor, and he also, we actually were able to resolve that out of court, and he was just recently sentenced to 20 years federal time. Next slide. So, since the time that we have initiated this sex trafficking investigations, 30 traffickers have been arrested, 85 victims identified, and prosecuted cases. We also have 58 arrests of suspects of other child exploitation-related crimes and 50 victims identified in these investigations as well. In 2020, we had about 100 referrals that were given to us, and in 2021, actually we had well over 100 referrals, and now starting 2022, we're then starting to get a lot of referrals into these investigations. One of the challenges in what we're doing here is every time we get a referral, number one, prioritizing the referral, and then investing time into it to see if it actually is sex trafficking, as a lot of social agencies believe or define sex trafficking in their own way, and we have to abide by what the legal statute of sex trafficking is. We can move on to the next slide. This is our priorities. It's always going to be minors first, and obviously sex trafficking, where force and violence is occurring. We do the Asian massage parlor investigations, and then at the very end, if we're able to, labor trafficking. Next slide. That's it. I thought that was right. Okay, well, I guess that's our last slide. Other than the unaddressed work right now is the Asian massage parlors at this time are not being addressed. We do know that every Asian massage parlor across the state is a sex trafficking. It is sex trafficking. There's just no other way of saying it. We know that for a fact, and it's not just in our state. It's across the whole nation. And then, like I said, it's adult sex trafficking. If we're able to, and it fits within the priorities, we will. And then labor trafficking. So that's what I have. Open to any questions or concerns.
Well, yeah, I would encourage my colleagues to post questions in the chat. I can see the chat now, so that's good news. I would thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. That was fantastic and heartbreaking, both. So I'm looking to my colleagues to see if there is anyone who is interested in asking a question, and I don't see any at this point. I guess I'll go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I posted to be in the queue in the chat.
You did. Well, maybe it's, well, now I guess I can't see it anymore. So anyway, go ahead, Forrest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. One I had before, and then one just what you just said there at the end sparked it. So just real quickly, you said every Asian massage parlor in the state is a front for sex trafficking. Is that what you said, or did I mishear you?
No, I did say that.
Is that well understood in the public? And is there some reason we can't, I assume then people are just building cases. Do they know that we know? I mean, that seems like a pretty remarkable assertion.
I don't know about the public. I do know that the Asian massage parlors know that that we do these investigations. I mean, unfortunately, in the trafficking realm, those that do dabble in the trafficking realm, not the traffickers themselves, but particular to the Johns, the guys that are seeking this type of endeavor, they know for a fact that every Asian massage parlor is a trafficking front. It's why they only go there. And I mean, the clues are very obvious. They're open at 12, 1, 2 in the morning. They don't have signs up in the front. They don't have the ability to, they don't have the websites. They don't have a lot of the things that legitimate massage parlors obviously have. And it's an all cash base. You can't pay with credit cards. So there's a lot of things that red flags that we know for a fact indicate that it is a front for trafficking.
Mr. Sergeant Aaron Witt, I will tell you, sir, that I'm fairly new to the human trafficking world in supervising it. And what I think I can safely say from the short time that I've been there working with the FBI and with Detective Torres is that every Asian parlor that we have had contact with, that we have had any input or investigation with, has absolutely been a front of that. Does it mean that there is not the possibility of an Asian massage parlor out there that is a legitimate parlor? No, that's absolutely a possibility. Just the fact that the ones that we've had contact with, that we've investigated, that we've had tips on, all of them have in fact been a front for some form of sex trafficking.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about the mass care shelter, but before I do that, I want to ask a follow-up to what you just said. So if such a large percentage of these massage parlors, and I wish we could find a different term than just Asian massage parlor, I'm not sure what it would be, but some way to differentiate. But do the landlords know, and do you talk to the landlords? Do you contact the landlords? It seems like if all of these businesses fall into this category, and we know that we have landlords renting to these businesses, do the landlords know this? Because I mean, presumably a lot of them are in strip malls and the like, unless they own freestanding buildings.
That is very true. I can't speak for the landlords knowing that this is what it is. I think because it's a legitimate business as far as the front is concerned, right? Because it's a massage parlor that they're supposed to be giving massages for, and they do sometimes end up obtaining licenses for that business, and they're paying, and there's typically no crime that's being committed that people know about, where the police are being dispatched to this location. I would assume that the landlords, as long as it's not a problem, is not going to be addressing it. And only at the very end, when we do start investigating a massage parlor and we do identify it and we do start looking at prosecution, is when we can then present it to the landlord as far as what really has been going on with the business. And then we try to interview them and see if they had knowledge about what's going on.
And sir, in the cases that we have been able to show that the ownership is complicit, we've actually moved toward asset forfeiture through working with Detective Torres. That is related to some of our internet crimes against children investigations, but it would apply the same here. And part of the reason I think the wisdom of the chain of command in bringing the two task force together is that many of the investigations that we do are using the same investigative techniques, components, and expertise. Those are some of the things that we hope to address and to move forward. One final thought on that. The massage parlors that are a front for illicit activities, What often has happened is that in the initial stages of that investigation, one of the higher priority circumstances come up, such as a child being trafficked that becomes a victim of human trafficking that is a child, takes the initial priority of that investigation. Whether or not the focus of the investigation is that massage parlor, it takes a secondary role, and that's some of the unworked investigations that we'd like to focus on. It's just that if we have children being exploited for human trafficking, that's always going to take a priority over a business that's a front for illicit sexual activities.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Chair, could I ask the other question?
Yes, please. But before you do that, just two things real quick. Apparently, I can't see the chat, so I would appreciate some help with that in terms of who's in the queue. And second, I want to make sure that I'm pointing out that I don't want to leave this conversation around these parlors. I guess I just want to express that I'm very concerned about them, and we need to have some follow-up conversation about them. So go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, and I would echo that. So, a number of the high-risk categories you described there are, we're people experiencing homelessness and certain communities within the homeless community, subsections. And so I'm wondering, and obviously you can't give away any information about ongoing investigations or those kind of things, but to what degree has the establishment of the mass care shelter and the sort of consolidation of a lot of those communities impacted the work that you do?
Yes. Okay. So we conducted training at, and I don't know who was running Sullivan at the time because it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. We conducted a training for the staff to identify sex and human trafficking there, and we got some initial responses back at the right after our training, but after that, many of the shelters reached out to us again to point out what they had thought was human trafficking investigations.
Okay, and has it made your work easier or harder to have a facility of that size, or has there been no noticeable impact versus the pre-COVID situation with the different facilities?
Sir, it hasn't really affected us because our focus has been so much on the minors, and it's adults that go to the homeless shelter. So we have not seen that it's affected our investigation whatsoever. We know for a fact that there's trafficking going on with the homeless, but we just have not been able to identify them. And that way we can quantify it any number of investigations.
Sir, if the same question were asked about the Covenant House or McLaughlin Youth Center, I think we could definitively tell you that there have been multiple investigations that have stemmed from contacts and information that have come out of those facilities. Again, with the focus being on minors, those are two of the two of the most prominent locations where we end up making contacts with minors that are victims of human trafficking.
Thank you. And I would note that I would hope, and I assume it's too early in the program's life, but one of the things that I think this body is proud of last year is that we helped fund the new MAC house at the Covenant House that sort of separates some of the older and younger youth. And I would hope that might lead to, preventing some of the more harmful interactions. But that program just got started, so we'll see how that shakes out.
And it is. We have been working hand in hand with Covenant House for a few years, and they have direct access to us. They call us by cell phone, and we are there. They call, we will come running. So that has worked. That really did help.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And because I can't see the chat, are there other members in the queue that would like to ask a question? Okay, hearing none. First of all, thank you again for your presentation. I would just like to, again, put a pin in this, what seems to me as, I certainly understand, we have to use our resources thoughtfully in terms of how we address these issues within our city. But I will say that from my perspective, these parlors are obvious. It's very clear to me what is a legitimate and what is not a legitimate just by driving past. And it's clear to me that this is happening within our city, and I see them all over the place. I don't know how many there are, but I see them all over the place. And so that's really concerning to me, and it's a conversation that I think I'd really love to continue, because if it's that obvious and they're right there, it seems like something that we should be addressing in our city. So. If there's nothing else, again, thank you for your time. Chief, anything else for you to add before we move on to Anchorage Fire Department?
We are the recipients of a grant that involves human trafficking that we do. We are partnering with some of the community organizations. So we will address some of the concerns and look at it from different angles as well.
Thank you, Chief. And again, I don't see anybody in the chat because I can't see the chat. So anybody else on Anchorage Police Department before we move on? Okay, great. All right, we're going to move on to the Anchorage Fire Department. Chief Schrage, I believe you're here. Great, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am here. Good morning. It is barely still morning. I have a presentation ready if Kiana could load that up. There we go. Okay, here is my brief monthly report from the Anchorage Fire Department. I'll be covering 3 topics today. The first one is our overtime summary for February. We'll be talking about Girdwood extrication, and then I'll finish it off with a discussion about Rescue Task Force initiative that we're working with the police department on. So what you see before you now is a snapshot of our overtime from February. As you can see here, we spent just shy of $178,000 in overtime during the entire month of February. Of that, about $14,000 was the result of COVID. And the total amount of overtime that we would have normally spent would have been $279,000. But owing to the nighttime apparatus company closures that we've been doing, we staved off about $102,000 in overtime. For comparison, that's a 41% reduction in the overtime that we would have spent. For comparison, we staved off $110,000 in January, so those figures are similar. In February of last year, we spent $291,000 in overtime, which is similar to what we would have spent had we not closed companies at night during February. And then lastly, this still exceeds our monthly allotment for overtime. So even though we reduced our overtime by 41%, in order to make overtime, we would have to limit our overtime monthly to about $168,000 per month, every month of the year. So great. I will pause for questions.
Thank you, Chief. And strangely enough, the chat shows up on my phone and not on my computer. So Ms. LaFrance, I see you're in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Schrage, for being here today. So my first question is just on this slide, that last line, the possible number, is that the total budget for February, including regular time? And then I have a question for the municipal manager concerning apparatus closures and if there is a risk for the community with continuing with the plan of action.
Assemblymember LaFrance, through the chair, I'll take the first question. The $279,000, the bottom line that you see there, is the sum of the amount of overtime that we actually paid, which was $177,772, plus the amount of overtime we didn't pay due to apparatus closures, which is $101,640. So that is only overtime and does not include straight time.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Amy Dabowski, Municipal Manager. I will queue it up, but I'm going to have Chief Schrage talk to the question about risk. I think Chief Schrage has been very clear that any active management of fire apparatus, when we're making a decision to close this rig at this time or divert resources to another thing, it's never without risk, but we do believe it's a manageable risk based on data, based on operational needs. So with that, I think the best person to speak to that a little bit more eloquently would be Chief Schrage.
Okay, again, through the chair, on the topic of risk, the apparatus closures are not without risk. It is a calculated risk. We're doing what we're doing in order to keep these companies open when they are most needed, which is when most of the calls occur, which is during the daytime. So far, we have not experienced a significant negative outcome due to these closures, but the risk nonetheless exists. The risk always exists that we won't have the right company staffed at the right time of day for the incidents that we're confronted with. But so far that hasn't happened to the point that there was a negative outcome. These closures have complicated our operations somewhat. For example, it changes the way we manage our water on wheels for areas that don't have fire hydrants. There's also a risk that comes from a major structural fire. A structure fire is a high risk, reduced frequency event during which the firefighters are performing at a maximum level, and it's complicated by the fact that a crew may have just been reconstituted partway through the shift. And in order to perform at the maximum level, there's an element of understanding your crew and their capabilities and having had time to rehearse, if you will, during the day. So again, there have been no significant negative outcomes, but it does have a detrimental effect on our operations.
Thank you, Chief Schrage, and thank you for clarifying the numbers on the slide. I had misread the line about the COVID OT, and so my math didn't add up. So thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chief, I'm not sure if this is the right slide to bring this up, but you had mentioned crews, and I'm wondering, are we meeting the standard, the sort of industry standard for staffing on our fire apparatuses? And, is that part of our cost savings that we aren't doing so?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Dunbar, through the chair. We don't generally fully meet the national standard for staffing of fire apparatus. The National Fire Protection Association promulgates consensus standards that are not compulsory, But the standard specified by the NFPA is that fire companies should be staffed with 4 personnel. We don't meet that across the board. We didn't meet it across the board before we started reducing these companies at night. In fact, closing these companies at night has increased the number of companies that we can staff with 4 people for part of the shift. And the reason for that is if we shut down truck 12 or truck 1 or engine 3, for example, in the middle of the night, because we didn't have a captain and an engineer available without paying overtime, then the firefighters from those crews would be reassigned to different trucks or engines. And so that contributes, it has contributed to having more of these 4-person companies. So it's complicated. We don't generally meet it. We meet it some of the times and possibly slightly more. So at night we have fewer companies in service, but more of those companies are staffed with 4 people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see anybody else in the queue at this point. I'm going to put myself in the queue and just ask a question. Did I hear someone else? I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. This is Suzanne. I'll go after you.
Okay, great. Yep, I saw you pop in just now. I guess one of the questions that I have, Chief, is really around language and the use of the word overtime. And my understanding is the way that schedules are built and the way the staffing is done, overtime is built in because of the time that your staff work. And so I guess the question I have is that from the public's perspective, overtime sounds like extra. It sounds like, something that's outside of the normal budget. But I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that you staff, overtime is built in to that staffing. And so I guess my question is, why isn't that just budget? Why isn't it just this is the budget that we have, and are we meeting our budget or not? And so I've gotten a few sort of calls about this and asking about, why are we using this extra money? But then when I investigated a little bit more, I learned that actually this is not extra time. This is part of a normal shift. Am I correct in that in saying that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. I think I would welcome you to clarify if I get it wrong here, but I think what you're speaking of is what we call FLSA overtime. We have under the Fair Labor Standards Act is what specifies, for example, that if you work more than 40 hours in a week, you get paid overtime for any additional hours. For firefighters in particular, the Fair Labor Standards Act specifies that firefighters are eligible for overtime after they've worked 53 hours in a week using our schedule. Mm-hmm. Our firefighters actually work 56 hours a week. So it's true that there's 3 hours of overtime programmed into every firefighter's wage every pay period or every week of the year. So I think that may be what you're asking about. Our staffing is sufficient to staff all of our trucks and engines and ambulances, and we have an overtime budget to cover when our firefighters and EMTs and paramedics are on scheduled leave. It's not sufficient to cover the cost of unscheduled overtimes, such as people that are injured or have COVID or call in sick or have family medical leave, qualifying events such as a new child. Those are the things that are contributing to our budget overage in overtime.
I see. And I guess that helps me to understand it. And my understanding also is that the amount of leave time, because of the nature of your work, is traditionally longer. There's more than in another field. And I guess the piece that I'm just wanting to make sure of is that that built-in overtime, are you including that in your calculations of overtime. So when we see the amount that we've budgeted for overtime, are you separating out what's already been built in terms of what you know is going to be done, that's budgeted, and what is unexpected that you're trying to manage?
Yes, thank you for the questions. Again, Mr. Chairman. So if we're talking about the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime, the 3 hours per week per employee in operations, those figures are not included here. We reconcile that with the budget later on. Those I think are, I think we're actually budgeted for that in straight time. I'm not entirely certain about that. And then later on, we transfer that in as needed.
I see.
We can predict how many people, we can look ahead months or weeks or months and know how many people are going to be away on scheduled leave. And we have a sufficient overtime budget to cover those absences. We don't have enough straight time. There aren't enough employees to enable people to take leave and still staff all of the seats that need to be staffed.
Okay.
And then finally, to your question about the leave accrual and taking of leave, it's true. So to take a day off of work, a typical employee would need 8 hours of leave. Our operations employees work 24 hours in a day. So to take a day off, they take 24 hours of leave. Now, of course, that shift is backed up by 2 days off, but still the accrual rate and the amount of leave to take off the same amount of time is higher than it would be for a typical employee.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I appreciate that clarification. And I guess the main piece I wanted to just sort of emphasize is that that when we're budgeting based on what we know, and then there's this sort of this manageable piece. And I just want to make sure that we're separating those two out, and not necessarily mixing them, because I think it creates confusion in terms of what our budget is and what our need is. And my concern overall is that I feel like that we're underfunding your department and asking you to cut, and to Ms. LaFrance's point, to the point of where I'm concerned about the risk. So I just want to make that clear. And then so I have Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the point you raised concerning identifying and separating the built-in overtime from the other overtime due to illness or other kinds of leave. And I think that would be helpful to see that breakout. And I wanted to say thank you to Chief Schrage and AFD personnel for the critical services that you provide to the community. And I recognize the challenge of operating in this budget constrained environment. That said, as a resident and representative of District 6, where fire danger is high, wildland fire danger, the practice of closing apparatuses makes me really nervous. It's, as I said before, not a practice that I support. It's not a best practice, and it does pose risk to the community, whether calculated or otherwise. And so I wanted to provide a little more context as it relates to the 1,694 hours that the administration has saved with the practice of closing apparatus. We're not talking about the risk to the community and the impacts to the frontline first responders, and I think that's really important. So when we look at February, the total closures, 85 apparatus closures, Station 5 downtown had 23, Station 3 in Mountain View, there were 2, Station 4 in Midtown had 8, Station 9 South Anchorage Lower Hillside had 22, Station 12 Diamond had 17, Station 14 Stuck Again had 7, Battalion 3 in East Anchorage had 4, and Battalion 2 in South Anchorage had 2. And with all the apparatus open, as mentioned, we're still not meeting the minimum staffing per National Fire Protection Association standards. And I hope that explaining to the community in this way will bring some perspective to how the community is being impacted. I believe the community believes these units are open, and there are some folks in my district who are surprised still to learn that there is this practice of rolling closures. Also, am concerned that there's no public messaging from AFD or the administration to notify the community about their apparatus being closed. And I think, this is something that is just so critical, especially as we move into spring and the focus on fire danger. I mean, not just in the hillside, but also Chugiak, Eagle River, and other areas of the municipality will become more of a focal point for discussion. So again, thank you, Chief, to you and to the AFD teams for all your service and support. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chief, would you like to share any comments in response to any of that? And I also see Ms. Demboski.
Well, I appreciate your comments in support, and I have nothing else to add to that. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Demboski, would you like to comment?
Sure. I just would thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to, reassure people, just because, maybe tender 9 is closed or a piece of apparatus is being actively managed for an evening to be able to achieve budget, it doesn't mean there's no coverage. I think that's a really important nuance for people to understand is the fire department leadership is actively managing all of their staff, all of their resources to ensure that they have adequate coverage throughout the municipality based on operational need and coverage. And I think that is just a nuance to remember. It just because something might be closed for a night, we might have a fire engine out of service because of a mechanical issue. It doesn't mean that that area of town is without coverage. So I think that's a really important thing. But I also want to highlight, Chief Schrage and his leadership team have engaged in numerous operational efforts, not just one. They have a multi-tiered approach to be able to afford this very expensive, probably the most expensive operation for any municipal department. And they're doing a remarkable job with what they have. Obviously, we have to work within the tax cap that we have. And when we come forward with budget adjustments for AFD, I think it'll be a decision for the assembly to make, frankly. If you want to add more money to AFD, where are you going to get the money from and who are you going to cut? So I think that's a really important conversation to have. But I think the work that is going on behind the scenes by AFD leadership, they don't take this lightly. It is a very serious conversation that we have almost weekly about where resources need to go, and they're the ones that are leading the charge, and they're advising the administration on the best way that they can manage their department. So I just want to put out from the administration's perspective that we truly appreciate all of the firefighters, all of the captains, all of the battalion chiefs, and of course AFD's leadership to making sure that our community is kept safe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Demboski. I don't at this point see any other members in the queue. Do other members, maybe that I don't see, have any other questions for Chief Schrage? Okay, Chief, any final comments, or are you all set?
I believe I'm all set, and we can go to the next slide, please.
Super, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to spend just a few minutes of talking about the situation with extrication equipment in Girdwood and along the Seward Highway corridor between Anchorage and Girdwood. This is a topic that has generated some public discussion. There was a Alaska News Source story about it, and you can see this image that was from that story. So I just wanted to explain what's going on here. So the basic issue is that the equipment that the Girdwood Fire Department has is decades old. They've had a couple of failures. You can see a picture of one here in front of us. And the tools are old enough that they just simply can't be repaired. There are no parts for these anymore. Next slide, please. What we're talking about is we're talking, this is an area-wide EMS issue. This is outside of the Anchorage Fire Service area and outside of the Girdwood Fire Service area. We're talking about the areas in between that are within the municipality, and therefore we have an obligation under area-wide EMS to be able to respond to vehicle crashes and medical incidents along the highway. And so Girdwood Fire and Rescue, we call it the Girdwood Fire Department. They provide fire protection in the Girdwood Valley, paid for with taxes collected within the Girdwood Valley service area. And any expense that would be used to respond to the area between Anchorage and Girdwood would be area-wide EMS or area-wide dollars. And so last April, the voters approved a general obligation bond to purchase a new truck for responding along there, but there's not sufficient bond authority to replace the tools that they would put on this new truck. Next slide, please. So what we've done is, in the interim, we have loaned Girdwood two, they're called hydraulic rescue tools. They are made by the same manufacturer as the heavy hydraulic tools that we saw in the first image. These are very powerful battery operated tools that are suitable for most vehicle crashes. But they aren't the full package of having a full complement of high-powered hydraulic tools. So Girdwood has two tools. There's a spreader, which you see there, and then they have a cutter, which was similar to what you saw in the first picture, that they are using, and they can use those while we work out a way to find funding to replace their complement of tools. We can also respond from Anchorage if there were a heavy semi-tractor trailer that tipped over and crushed somebody. We would respond similarly from Anchorage with some more and heavier tools as well. I'll point out that Chief Weston, who's the chief in Girdwood, has worked with our congressional delegation. She's contacted her legislators. She has applied for a Fire Act grant, and she's been talking to the state DOT about other funding mechanisms for providing tools for assistance along the Seward Highway. So far without success, but that's my update on Girdwood extrication equipment. I'll pause there for questions.
Thank you, Chief. I don't see any questions in my queue. Are there any questions that I'm missing from members? Nope, we're good. Thanks, Chief.
Okay, next slide then. I wanted to brief you on an initiative that some of the Anchorage Fire Department and some of the Anchorage Police Department personnel are working together, talking about response plans for active shooter or other hostile events. These are incidents where somebody is, for example, we've heard of stories about, well, not stories, we've heard of incidents of school shootings and theater shootings and things like that. What we're collaborating on is a way of responding that will improve the survival rates from people that are injured in events like these. And the goal is, what you see here is to provide rapid care at the place where somebody is wounded and getting them out of there quickly so that they can have definitive care treated by ambulance personnel outside the building or outside the area. Next slide. I've come to appreciate that law enforcement's first priority is and will always be to neutralize the threat, and there's nothing about this initiative that would change that. The law enforcement officers responding to an incident like this would obviously go do what they do. They would enter the building. They would, or what we would call the hot zone, which is the place that is under direct threat, and they would attempt to take out the person who's causing the harm. What this initiative does is it teams additional police officers, law enforcement officers, in a second wave with some paramedics and firefighters who then would stay out of direct harm. They would not go into the hot zone, but they would go into areas where there can be adequate protection provided either by the building or by the building in combination with protection of other law enforcement officers. This graphic here is a typical way, it's a typical depiction of how some cities are doing this. This is not necessarily what we've settled on here in Anchorage. We're going to let the police personnel and the fire personnel sort out which scenario is going to work best here in Anchorage. But this illustrates a typical way that some cities are doing it, and this particular one is from Los Angeles. Next slide. And then finally, this is a work in progress. This is a possible schedule that we're talking about for how we might come forth with some policy development and some training. And it also depends on, there are many variables that go into our ability to actually providing this training, such as the availability of personnel and the funding for it. And that concludes my report, and I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you, Chief, for your report. That was great, and looking forward to seeing how that that collaborative work you're doing with APD rolls forward. We're short on time, but I want to make sure I give Sarah a few minutes to give a vanilla update as well. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. In prosecution, trials are still going along, and so I'm going to actually defer to Monica Elkington, the deputy in charge of domestic violence, who had a trial recently. So,
hello. We here in prosecution have been very excited that the courts have started up jury trials about a month ago. And many of our cases have been settling with the threat of trial, which is exactly what we like. But last week we were able to do one, so I just wanted to share a success story. We have 2 APD officers who have desks here in prosecution with us, and their job is domestic violence bail compliance. So what they do is they go out and check on offenders who are not supposed to be contacting their victims, and they are not supposed to be at various places or stalking their victims, etc. And so we they go out and check on them, see if there's people with open warrants. And since we are in the backlog, the case that we did last week was an older case, but our DV compliance officers went out and found somebody who was supposed to be with a third-party custodian, and he was not with his third-party custodian. And so we prosecuted both the defendant and the third-party custodian. The trial we did last week was against the third-party custodian, who was not keeping track of him like she should have been. She was supposed to be in possession of his phone to make sure he wasn't contacting the domestic violence victim. She wasn't doing that either. So the compliance officers found them. We prosecuted both of them. And she was convicted of violating the court appointment of a third-party custodian. So we are just working through each case step by step as we go through the backlog, but it's something that is very important. And as we work with our APD partners and the compliance officers, it's something that we are out checking to make sure that these offenders are following their bail conditions. So that's just a success story that we have as we are plodding away at the backlog of cases.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm checking to see, do I have any questions or comments from members? Doesn't look like I do. Monica and Sarah, thank you for the update. That was great and efficient, wonderful. I would just share with any members of the public, look like we may have a few here that unfortunately we don't have time today to have any, well, no, we're going until 12:40, don't we? Oh, sorry about that. I thought we went to 12:30. Yeah, so let's give a little bit of time. If there's anybody from the public who would like to come forward, you'll need to do *6 to unmute. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you can share your name for the record and then go ahead and start. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to unmute and share comments during this last part? Just give one more minute here to give people a chance. Looks like there's maybe a couple of numbers on there. So *6 and unmute if you'd like to speak. All right. Well, if you want to share questions or comments, don't hesitate to email any of us on the assembly. We're happy to answer any questions we can. Thank you for the presentations today. Thank you for the engagement. With no other questions, looks like in the queue, I'm going to give everybody back 10 minutes of their day. So this meeting is adjourned. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.